All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to get right into it. Today is Thursday, October 23. It's a little after 7 p.m. We're here for a work session to discuss the new state land use laws and how they impact the town. But first order of business, as always, is Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is the land acknowledgement statement. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land in which the town is now located. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe, whose land and water we benefit from today. All right, we're now going to dive right into it. I'm going to hand it over to Town Manager Jim Manny for an introduction.
Thank you. Good evening. Tonight is, once again, is like you said, it's a work session, and it's based around the land use laws as it pertains to the legislative changes that have happened in years 23, 24, 25. We have Jamie Rabbit here, who is the Director of Planning. We have Amy Goins here, who's legal counsel that will give you any interpretation you might need of some of the stuff that's being said. We also have the Chair of the Planning Board here, Maria Mack, and we have members of the Planning Board here. So this is a 16-page document that has some technical information on it, and Jamie will be getting up now, Jamie Rabbit, and he set his timer for 18 minutes to do this. So let's see if he follows through on that, Jamie.
Jim challenged me to that. So, first I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak with you tonight on this important topic associated with legislative changes to Rhode Island's land use law. The presentation this evening is not intended to be all-inclusive. The presentation is intended to highlight the majority of the significant changes to Rhode Island law that impact the town of South Kingstown. In essence, we're flying at 100,000 feet tonight. We can drop down to 50. I'm sure you'll have some questions that may require us to have boots on the ground, and that's why Amy's here tonight to answer those really tough legal questions. And again, we're doing this kind of on the planning side, flying at 100,000 feet. We're potentially prepared to drop down lower, answer questions, have a discussion about some of the changes and potential implications. But again, we're trying to hit the highlights of the primary changes that have occurred in 2023, 2024, and 2025. Again, in a few moments, I'm going to give a brief overview with summaries of the 2023, 2024, 2025 changes. We will look at some of the challenges and opportunities, review some examples, highlight a few positive outcomes, and wrap up with next steps, followed with questions and discussions. Again, Amy is here tonight as support. If you have any significant implications with regards to the law or how a definition affects us or any additional detail regarding those legislative changes. So again, summary of 2023, 2024, 2025, as well as challenges and opportunities, examples, positive outcomes, next steps, questions, and discussions. Rhode Island's legislature has made several changes to land use law over the past few years. I want to state tonight that the town is compliant with all changes through 2023. The town has also made an internal administrative changes to comply with changes in 2024 and 2025. Applications are by local regulation and state law. All applications are following state law currently, even if the regulations have a section that hasn't changed specific verbiage. State law is a regulating guideline, and the planning department as well as the zoning department are following state law as well as local regulatory rules in processing all land use applications. So we're not missing a beat on the regulatory side. Boards and commissions have been kept up to date, and again, applications are processed according to Rhode Island law and local regulations. Staff continues to work with legal counsel to solidify language and existing regulations and comply with these changes. Information is provided to applicants and the public, and we continue to coordinate with legal while managing a high volume of applications. Over the next few slides, I'm going to highlight some of the prominent changes in 2023, 2024, and 2025. In 2023, zoning relief standards were amended associated with hardship. In essence, there was criteria you had to meet for hardships. That language was actually, I don't want to say simplified or reduced, but it was clarified in an effort to make the standard more achievable. The hardship was very hard to achieve. In essence, it couldn't be financial and it couldn't be self-imposed. So in most instances, all development, if you're proposing to do something outside of the regulations, is either self-imposed, because you're proposing to do something outside the regulations, or potentially financially burdensome because it would be more expensive to do it compliant, or you would potentially have a higher financial return if you were allowed to do things outside the regulations. Again, that standard was slightly relaxed in new legislation in 2023. Variance applications and special permit applications have the ability to be merged. Special use criteria was mandated. Otherwise, without standards, there was no enforcement of special conditions. I'll give you a brief example. Applications that were special use, a drive-through window, a drive-up teller window, restaurant, retail, or bank, typically would be a special use permit. By being a special use permit, you could look at additional standards and potentially apply conditions based on the potential impact of the development on the community. The legislative change in 2023 stated, if you do not have it in your regulations and you come to the determination that the proposed development will have impact on the community, you cannot deny it unless your special use standards explicitly state you can deny it because of a regulatory criteria contained under your written regulations. So it made it more black and white and removed a lot of gray areas. So for drive-throughs, if you didn't say you needed a 10-car stack and you have a very high volume restaurant that you know you needed a 10-car stack, if it wasn't in your regulations, you couldn't deny the application because they couldn't stack 10 cars before they went to the drive-through window. Even though you knew without a 10-car stack, you would back up traffic on a town road. That was the regulatory change. They made towns be more specific with regards to special use criteria versus a little more generic, which most of the 39 municipalities in Rhode Island had been. Dimensional standards.
Jamie,
yes.
Before we go on, I just don't want to lose this particular point. When you say they drew a line to make it more black and white,
Yes.
Are you talking about the local regulations having to have already been in place prior to June of '93,
No.
or prior to the application going in?
Prior to the application began. So what we did in 2023, 2024, we went through every land use item in the regulations, permitted uses as of right, and special use permits. We looked at every special use permit and made a determination whether we had sufficient standards in order to regulate them, and we made a decision. We either did or we didn't. If we didn't, we had to make a choice: add specific standards or remove it from special use criteria and either allow it as of right or say that it's not allowed. In some instances, because of the change in nomenclature, regulations were written in the 60s and 70s, and we're updating them in 2024, 25. We made the determination that they're no longer valid, permitted use as of right. In other scenarios, we determined that the use is too specific to develop enough criteria, so the planning board made a decision to not allow it anymore. And that was done throughout the zoning code. Dimensional standards for substandard lots were relaxed. Standards relating to existing undersized lots is established through neighborhood zoning districts. And in essence, if you had an undersized lot, you can proportionally change setbacks based on that lot, and I can go into more detail on that later. But again, legislatures made local towns relax existing standards as it relates to dimensional requirements. Unified development permitting process was made mandatory. Applicants no longer required to go to the zoning board for regulatory relief, one-stop shopping. Typically, when you needed a variance or relief from the zoning regulations, you had to do a two-step process. You would go to the zoning board for relief. Once you got that relief, you could go to the planning board. So you had to do one before the other. The reverse of that is you could go to the planning board first. The planning board could make a determination contingent upon them at some point going to the zoning board for relief of a regulation that they didn't meet. In other states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, you have to get the relief first. You can't make it a condition of approval. Planning boards or zoning boards should not be in my view, not approving plans that aren't compliant with the regulations. The only way to be compliant is to follow them or get relief from following them. Rhode Island's unique. You used to be able to do it after the fact. What they now allow is that the planning board can grant relief under Unified Development Review. Other changes were made to the comprehensive permit, which clarified density and eliminated master plan application step. However, it should be noted that they eliminated the master plan in 2023. Developers complained in 2024, so the legislation was changed in 2025 to bring back a permitting process that they removed 2 years prior. So, just moving along on the 2023 changes. We have adaptive reuse is now allowed by right. What adaptive reuse is the redevelopment of a commercial and or industrial property to residential. Again, we can clarify that a little more later. There was language regarding new comprehensive community plans, and that new plans must include LMI, low moderate income housing overview and plan within the document. Our existing document is adopted in 2021. It'll be current until 2031. It does have a segment that talks specifically about housing and affordable housing. It just would need to be updated in 2031 to be completely compliant with the new legislation. So we're compliant now, we'll need to amend later. The land use calendar for judicial level review was streamlined on the appeal process. That really doesn't affect us at the local level, affects the developer if they appeal an approval. The next two bullets highlight changes made to major and minor land use applications. Changes to these two types of land use developments also modify the permitting process through the planning board. And again, there are minor changes to the definitions of major and minor subdivisions, as well as land use development projects that I'm not going to bore you to death on. They're dimensional, they're whether you have frontage on a town road, unimproved town road, whether you're proposing a new road, whether you're on a private road, whether you're on a private road that's really just a public driveway. So there's a host of new litany that we put things in different permitting categories based on those changes. And we've been doing that since 2023. In the 2024 slide, it starts out with laws changed associated with accessory dwelling units. Again, ADUs have historically always been allowed in South Kingstown on any residentially zoned property. Originally, we had that minimum floor area of 750 square feet. The legislation that was changed in 2024 allows ADUs, permitted use as of right, on any lot 20,000 square feet or less, but they added some new dimensional standards. 1 bedrooms are limited to 900 square feet, and 2 bedrooms are limited to 1,200 square feet. So again, we used to allow them anywhere residentially. The legislation actually became more restrictive than our regulations, so we're kind of dual process there. There was also a definition on household size, though that changed from 3 to 5. However, it should be noted that there was a judicial decision in Narragansett that in essence puts that regulatory change on hold as that is further evaluated in the judicial side and as well as given legal guidance from our town council. Changes were made to inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning relates to residential developments in South Kingstown. Inclusionary zoning has an affordability component. Any development that includes 6 or more residential units is required to do an inclusionary element, and that inclusionary element requires deed-restricted affordable to be part of that. The changes in legislation clarify how much of a density bonus the developer gets and at which stage the density bonus is calculated. The net result of that is typically in an inclusionary zoning, the goal is to have 25% affordable. Once you apply the density bonus, that 25%, which is calculated pre-density bonus, drops to the 15 to 16% range. So your goal of inclusionary was 25. Changes in legislation due to the calculation drop that 25. We'll take a median of 16%. So if you're doing a 100-lot inclusionary, our goal would be 25 units. Inclusionary drops it down to 16. So it's a loss of 9 units. And that was a legislative change. Prior to the legislative change in the calculation of the density bonus, we were around 18 and 19%. So there's just a slight reduction. Inclusionary zoning rules were again modified on a density bonus. There was also a density bonus to substandard lots, and someone may think of what a substandard lot is. Typically, a substandard lot would be defined as an existing lot in an established neighborhood. So if you had an R20 zone, which is a 20,000 square foot zone, and there happened to be a 1 acre lot, in most instances, you could only develop that 1 acre lot as one house lot. The change of an oversized lot would allow someone to potentially redevelop that lot in the same neighborhood standing as the existing lots in the area. So although you have 1 acre, if the existing neighborhood is 20,000 square foot lots, you could probably get 2 lots there. Now, we're not going to get into a discussion of environmental constraints or other constraints the property may have, but it basically puts you back to the zoning of the neighborhood, even though you may be an odd property and larger than what the neighborhood has. And again, I'm sure as you move forward, you'll have questions, because again, we're flying at a very high level. Again, some additional changes in 2024. The legislation mandated that all 39 municipalities move to electronic permitting. That was a target date of October 1st, 2025. There is no penalty to a community if you don't meet that 10/1 date. We did not want to mirror the rollout of DEM's electronic permitting, where there was a 6-month backlog, plus or minus, when they rolled out existing electronic permitting. We're still beta testing it with our IT department. We're probably a month or 2 months away from rolling that out. We want to make sure when we hit the street running, and we don't have to put it out there and potentially pull it back. It's going to be a change of the way we do business. And again, our goal is to go paperless. Certain mobile and manufacturing homes may be counted as low and moderate income units. Primarily if you have a mobile, and I'll clarify, a manufactured home is the historic nomenclature of a mobile home or trailer. In 1974, the federal government charged the HUD to come up with a regulation associated with trailers and mobile homes. There had been no standard for those types of housing units prior to 1974. In 1974, the legislation at the federal level changed, and in 1976, HUD established rules. When HUD established rules, all types of units built on a chassis that contained an axle, that was the sole way to bring that product to a job site, was now considered a manufactured home. So you get rid of the terminology of mobile or trailer, and that unit with an axle on a steel frame that is brought to a property, dropped on a temporary or permanent foundation, is now called a manufactured home. And I'll show you a slide a little bit later that clarifies manufactured home, modular home, and stick-built home. You get half a credit for an affordable unit, and there's a host of criteria you have to meet. It has to be on its own lot or owned by someone with rights to that lot, and there's a number of items there. And it has to meet the 1976 standard. So if it was built prior to 1976, it can't qualify as an affordable unit because it doesn't meet that HUD construction standard. The state also clarified reasons you can adopt a moratorium. Typically, municipalities, if new legislation was passed, will say for manufactured homes, and the town couldn't react quick enough to the changes, a municipality may entertain creating a moratorium on the construction of any new manufactured homes. Legislation on the state level changed to say there are really only specific reasons a town can adopt a moratorium for land use purposes to prohibit new applications for coming in for a distinct period of time. So again, they made it more clear. I don't want to say more black and white. They limited a town's ability to pass moratoriums to react to land use changes at the state level. It also allows municipalities to combine zoning and planning boards. Right now they're separate. Most municipalities have them separate. I'm not here tonight to tell you it's a good, bad, or indifferent idea to combine them. Just there was a legislative change that allows them to combine zoning and planning into one regulatory board. Changes in 2025. There were changes to the comprehensive permit process for affordable housing applications, reverting back to the master plan and also solidifying a minimum density. Prior to changes in 2025, if a developer proposed an affordable housing project under the comprehensive permit law in Rhode Island, there was no minimum or maximum density they could ask for. The legislation states an amount, I believe it's around, I won't say for a fact, 15 units an acre. It doesn't mean they can't go less, and it doesn't mean they can't go higher. They just set a target. And there's been a lot of discussion in sessions I've been in on how you actually apply that. What happens if a developer comes in with a 4-story, 5-story building that has 20 units per acre? Can you deny it? It's not clear in the statute because it literally doesn't say you can't go above the following maximum density per unit. And I think it's there for a reason, because if I'm in Providence or if I'm in a different community, I may be able to go 30, 40 units an acre. But again, to me, it's a hollow number because there's no regulatory teeth behind it. Again, another change, they looked at oversized lots and subdivisions. And again, that's where you can look at the density, and there's a whole set of criteria there. If you're looking at an oversized lot, your neighborhood's defined. It's 200 feet from where you're proposing the new development, and you have to meet 50% of the lot size within 200 feet. So again, in that scenario I used earlier, if you have a 1-acre lot and an R20 zone, and everybody around you has a smaller 20,000 square foot lot, in all likelihood you'll get 2. You'll be able to go to the size of the neighborhood. But if there's only 5 20,000 square foot lots and a whole bunch of 1-acre lots, and you don't meet the 50% criteria, you won't be able to go to that reduced size of lot. The neighbors, the changes also went back to pre-application meetings are now optional. They used to be mandatory. This was a good thing for developers to come into a planning board and have a non-regulatory discussion with the planning board and staff in a setting like we're in tonight. The legislature made that optional versus mandatory, which means the first time a planning board may see an application is when they're applied and at the very first meeting where it's a live application and the time stamped and time frames are running. Oh, I'll back up one, too. There are also changes to findings associated with subdivision and land use development projects. Just for an oversimplification, we'll say there were 20 findings that a planning board had to find in order to approve, or if they couldn't find all 20 standards, they could deny. That's been reduced by about 25%. So they made it less rigorous for a developer to comply with findings or compliance with land use regulations. Again, a few of these are a little bit repetitious. Again, the adapted reuse allows a conversion of existing commercial building, office, schools, religious facilities, medical buildings, malls, or mixed-use developments to be converted to residential. You can have 50% of your square footage converted, and you can also have 15 units an acre, so long as 20% of those units that you're proposing on the residential side are deed restricted affordable. So again, allows you to convert a existing, if you had a bank wasn't functioning anymore, as of right, you could convert the bank into residential. You'd have to have a percentage of those affordable, but you could convert your residential, and in some cases your industrial land, in existing structures to residential. There are discussions amongst multiple lawyers and developers of what conversion means. There's a developer, I think, in the Warwick Cranston area who has a large industrial building with 40-foot ceilings, who is basically saying, I can build a second floor inside of my existing footprint and building envelope. And I think some communities are saying, no, your footprint and volume. So again, I anticipate in 2026, you may have a legislative change that defines what a conversion to footprint is when you have a large industrial structure with high ceilings. If you have 40 feet, you could do 3 floors. It's not clear in the statute. I don't think we have to worry too much about this at the present time in South Kingstown. But again, I can't predict the future. Again, manufactured homes are now treated the same as traditional stick-built. There are minor revisions to waivers associated with subdivision review and standards. Inclusionary zoning densities were clarified. Also, the town must allow more than single-family housing in urban service districts or boundaries. This isn't a local boundary. This is something that's managed by the statewide planning, and there are 2 urbanized areas in South Kingstown. Even though you may consider yourself a suburban community, most are associated with the old Tower Hill Road area in Route 1. So again, we're looking at converting that area to a form-based code, which will allow residential development. So if you move forward with the form-based code, we should be compliant with this as it relates to allowing residential units in your urban boundary. Also, attached single-family dwellings are allowed where duplexes are. And this may be confusing to some. Single-family dwellings where duplexes are. Basically what it's saying is attached single-family. And I traditionally, if you had a 4-unit townhouse, under current regulations and legislation in Rhode Island, that 4-unit townhouse can only be on 1 parcel of land. So basically it's a condo. What this legislation will allow is the same unit to be built under the same criteria and standards as that traditional condo development, except you'll be able to do 0 lot lines and basically make 4 separate deedable parcels. So you can own your condo and the land surrounding your condo, and then, so there'll be an end unit, 2 middle units, and an end unit, and you can own the land under the condo fee simple. That was 18 minutes. Yes, Deb?
So is that something that could apply or connect to the cottage zoning ordinance that we just re-upped?
No, that doesn't have implications on the cottage regulations, because it only deals with attached units. Cottage units are detached units, so it doesn't change that.
Okay.
So,
Jamie,
again,
before you go forward, just a quick question. So the manufactured homes now must be allowed wherever single-family homes are allowed. Is that different from what we changed a few months ago with manufactured homes?
Amy Goins.
I don't recall that we did change anything a few months ago. I know the topic came up a few months ago, but I'm not sure if this law had been effective when the council last discussed it. So we had provided a memo to the council that last year's legislation, 2024, made it optional for municipalities to treat manufactured homes the same as stick-built. This year, it's no longer optional. It's required starting, when this law passed and became effective.
Thank you.
so, again, I think the memo you're referring to, Jay, was a legal legislative update of what changed in the law. It required no regulatory change. As we move forward, we'll make our definitions consistent, but we're following Rhode Island law. Again, as I mentioned, the town's comprehensive plan has to be updated every 10 years. SK is compliant until 2031. One thing that we will need to do is potentially amend the town's comprehensive community plan as it relates to mixed-use development if the town entertains form-based code in the old Tower Hill area and neighborhood.
So you're on to the, Amy, you wrote the memo on September 13th about the manufactured homes. So I have to reread the top, but it talks about the 2024 legislative session. The General Assembly enacted a number of new laws to promote housing, and it goes on. And then it says, I think we did talk about this in a meeting too, and it came back up again. And we did talk about it got dropped, I feel like, and we needed to bring it back and make some changes. Am I remembering it correctly?
I had thought we made some definitional change at a meeting a few months ago, based on recommendation from the solicitor's office.
It may have been a meeting that I wasn't in attendance at, but I don't think, did the planning board give an advisory opinion? I'm not sure.
Roy, we can look to clarify that for
Okay.
you.
What I remember is that a member of the public came and spoke about it, and then we voted to bring it into the agenda of the meeting, and then we voted to, I think, let legal look at it and come back. But maybe I'm misremembering as well.
No, I don't think you are correctly remembering how I think it went as well.
Cool.
So there must be some language change that we're waiting for.
This change was part of the 2025 legislative package, the housing package. And again, that's what the planning director has started off saying. We're working on those brand-new changes that are only a few months old.
And to clarify, if the manufactured homes are allowed anywhere where single-family homes are allowed, we wouldn't need to do anything other than pass something that is not in contrast to what the state law says. Because even if our ordinance, so to speak, is in contrast with state law, it's not effective.
We are doing the important things as we should and in accordance with state law, which is when an application comes in, the town is processing it as it should be under the laws that are currently in effect. Amending the zoning ordinance to reflect state law is certainly important, and I think it's most important for the public, right, to see what the law is, because developers know this already. They know it as the laws are being written. It is important, though, to update our ordinances so that it reflects the law. But yes, if that is the law of the land now in Rhode Island, at least, that's what governs. We do need to bring our local ordinance up to date.
I think the importance of it is if a member of the public does a computer search and looks for manufactured homes, in our ordinances, they're going to see they're not allowed. But in fact, where it differs, we need to clean it up.
That's correct.
So with some challenges and opportunities, again, orderly, thorough, expeditious review of development applications is our primary task. We have statutory deadlines for action and approval. We are reacting to recent amendments in state law. We are looking at proactive changes at the local level. We're also trying to anticipate development trends and changes. That's one of the primary things we're exploring, form-based code and new development patterns on Old Tower Hill Road. The town could benefit from additional state funding and other resources to assist these tasks. There are some opportunities moving forward with the State Department of Housing for getting planning grants to potentially have technical staff assist in some of the regulatory changes or look at affordable housing opportunities. We also continue to have discussions with institutions like URI, as well as continued discussions with our legislative delegation. I'm just going to give a quick example of one of the legislative changes, kind of pre and post. One of the things that came up recently was an issue on Oak Street with regards to public notice. And I'll highlight one of the significant changes in land use law as it relates to minor subdivision approvals. Traditionally, there were minor administrative subdivisions that the administrative officer could approve. Those were, Rory and Mike shared a common property line. They wanted to move it 5 feet because someone wanted to plant trees and wanted a little more land. That's an administrative subdivision. Fully compliant lots, someone's just moving a property line a few feet. That doesn't go to the planning board. It goes to the administrative officer, who is, by your legislation, the planning director. Minor subdivisions would be 2, 3, 4 lots on an existing road. Those still went to the planning board and went to the TRC for formal application and approval. And your major subdivisions were things that needed regulatory relief, waivers from the provisions of the regulations, needed road construction, larger developments, larger subdivisions. The changes in new legislation, and one that's very important, is that administrative subdivisions primarily don't change. But on the minor side, if someone is developing on an existing improved town road and they are compliant with the dimensional requirements contained in the zoning code, they no longer have to go to the planning board and there's no notice to the public. So if someone has enough acreage on South Road and enough frontage, they could come in a completely compliant manner and develop 10 2-acre lots. And the neighborhood is going to find out when the for sale sign goes up on the individual lots or construction starts on one of the residential units. There is no requirement to notify anymore. Now, council, in a memo to you, I think a month or so ago, talked about this under the Oak Street discussion, that it's, and I share their conclusion, that it is onerous and also misleading if the town chooses to provide public notice where public notice isn't required, because it gives the public a sense that they have a say in the development. When in fact, primarily under subdivision rules, when someone is completely compliant with the regulations, I'll use a very fancy planning term, it could be the god-awfulest subdivision you have ever seen, but complies with your zoning regulations. Whether it's the planning board or your administrative officer, it should be approved because it's compliant with the regulations, regardless of neighborhood, opposition, regardless of whether someone feels there's harm or additional traffic. It's basically a dimensional review and code compliant review. And giving someone notice in a false sense that they can affect an outcome, I think is misguided. So yeah, I think I've said enough on that one, but that subdivision is probably one big change that's going to happen in this community, that at some point someone's going to do a 5-lot, 6-lot, could be a 20-lot subdivision, that someone will be at this podium at some point before the council saying, why wasn't I notified? Why didn't I have input? Why couldn't I affect change?
Sticking with the Oak Street example, prior to this legislative enactment, what would the procedure have been for a minor subdivision change?
Typically, it would be notice to abutters, and then if a public hearing was required, additional notice on top of that. And again,
So
typically minor subdivisions raised to major if they need relief from any regulation or even relief from a submission of information. So,
In the scenario, if the Oak Street application had come in under the old law, would the neighbors, the abutters, have to have been notified, and would it potentially
Yeah.
be?
the Oak Street scenario required no notice under the old law and will require no notice
Okay.
under the new law. That separate discussion, separate type of
Okay,
development.
thank you.
So there were no implications on Oak Street, post or pre. Just quickly, I know I'm probably approaching more like 25 minutes, but that's pretty good for me. Just a quick look at manufactured homes. And again, I did a quick pictorial. The bottom left is your traditional new definition of a manufactured home, which typically, historically, had been referred to as a trailer or a mobile home. That really changed back in 1976, but I think the stigma associated with those types of units are still referred to today. A manufactured home, and if I quizzed you before this presentation, if I said, Jay, what's a manufactured home? And you would say, any home built in a factory, right? That's partially right, partially not right. A manufactured home basically has an axle, is driven or towed to the site. A modular prefab home is built in a controlled facility, in an industrial setting. It is trailered to the site, but lifted off the trailer and put on a foundation. All right? The manufactured home is not lifted off the trailer. It is, in essence, jacked up and put on a foundation. Those are primary difference. And then a traditional stick-built home, we all know what that is. One thing to point out is that in 1976, they developed a standard for manufactured homes. The standard for manufactured homes does not require that home that will be part of your community to comply with local building codes. So if you have an insulation standard of R21 in a wall, that a manufactured home has a slightly less standard than that. They do not have to comply with the structural components of a stick-built or prefabbed home. Prefabbed homes, stick-built homes, 100% comply with state and local building codes. Manufactured homes have a standard, it's just slightly less than traditional. Some legislative positives. If South Kingstown ever reaches the 10% mark for affordable units, you are no longer susceptible to comprehensive permits. So if you hit that 10%, someone can't comp permit you. That's kind of the positive note. One of the challenges is you need 497 units to hit 10%. And if you built 25% of all your new units, you would have to build 2,000 units to become compliant. You do maybe 50 to 75 units a year. That'd take you a long time. I've always been questionable to the authorities who adopted the 10% because I don't think it was a fair benchmark. Because if you were a community at 3, how do you ever get to 10? And you may be a community, you're at 3 just because of land values, nothing you've done proprietary or in a harmful way to not promote affordable housing. But if you were a community at 9, you can get the 10, right? If you were at 9.6, you can get the 10. But when you start at 4, how do you ever get the 10? You know, it's hard.
It's also a continually moving target, isn't it?
It's a constantly, I did a spreadsheet for chief elected officials when I was in Connecticut of like a 30-year cycle. And in the 27th, 28th, 29th year, we got so close, but in those later years, the unit that was coming up on the 30-year deed restricted drops off the rolls.
Right.
You lose credit for that unit as you're trying to replace that unit. So it was reciprocal. You could never catch your tail. You were constantly chasing it. Even with we have a development of 104 units at South County Commons. That's 25% of 4. That's 25 units. 25 from 497. You see, it's still a big number. You have 470 something units you still have to build. If the lofts at Fairgrounds ever goes forward, that's potentially, another 70, 80 units. You're still going to be at 400 units. And those are 2 substantial projects. It's going to take you you still should try. It should be a goal, but it would be nice if legislation made something more reachable and achievable, that towns should try to increase their affordable housing stock by 5% over X number of years, not, you have to increase it 100%. So. Next steps, and again, this is my second to last slide. Legal counsel and planning staff continue to collaborate on drafting required amendments to the zoning regulations. Amy, Peter, and Andy and I speak monthly. We have a legislative update and discussion at every planning board work session. Again, the changes are potentially substantial. We may bring them in multiple batches to the town council. And again, our timeframes may vary, and some of the form-based code initiatives, if they move forward, will tick a number of boxes on the legislative changes. Those changes require review by a planning board, which is advisory to the town council, and a host of public hearings. The goal to accomplish this would be spring or early summer 2026. And again, we have further revisions for land use and subdivision regulations that need to be approved by the planning board. And that gets me to questions and discussions.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Any questions? I got a few. Maybe I'll just get things started here. So, Jamie, I want to talk about adaptive reuse. You had mentioned in 2023, adaptive reuse became as of right. Then there were further changes in 2025. Since, I guess, as of right has been, out there for over a year now, have we seen an effect in town from this?
We're having conversations with one developer on Main Street for adaptive reuse of an existing commercial building. And I think this regulation may actually help that developer because we have a regulation in the downtown district that the first floor is supposed to be dedicated to non-residential use. This regulation will actually help this developer make that conversion It will be at the sacrifice of first floor retail, office, or non-residential, but it will bring potentially 20 new units to the downtown, which brings an economic boost to Main Street. So again, sometimes it will benefit you, but there is a cost to that conversion. You lose something that's already there.
So are we
again,
seeing sort of a lot of activity or just isolated activity?
isolated activity. Yeah,
And
we
when we
haven't had
say-
anyone, I think one of the difficulties in South Kingstown is you don't have high vacancies, right? If downtown was half full, you may have developers looking very fast and hard at converting that empty space into residential because they know residential can be rented. You don't have a lot of vacant commercial or industrial space.
And when we say as of right, that means as long as they comply with local regulations, they can just do it. They don't need any, planning board, zoning board, or administrative approval. Is that correct?
So there, and Amy can potentially add to this. As of right is we'll call it a gray term, not necessarily black and white. It's as of right, but there may be also making other conversions to the site to accommodate that may put them before a planning board or put them before zoning for a waiver provision. But if they weren't changing a thing, it becomes more permitted as of right, go and get your building permit.
All right.
I'll let Amy.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, as of right means that no relief is required for the use. So in many commercial or industrial zones, you need some kind of either a special use permit or a use variance, right? Residential use is typically not permitted in those zones. The adaptive reuse law, when it was first adopted a couple of years ago, changed that dramatically. So you no longer have to show a hardship or meet the special use permit standards. By right, you can convert a mill, for example, to housing. This year, one of the requirements that was added was that the industrial building has to be vacant for at least a year before the applicant submits the application to convert that either wholly or partially to housing.
So even though it's as of right, that particular thing would require an application?
It would require an application, and depending on the number of residential units proposed, it would qualify as either a minor or major land development project, which, again, minor projects eligible for administrative approval, they don't need to go to the planning board. Major projects would need to go to the planning board. So it depends on the scope of the project. But as of right is significant because it means you don't need to, there's no hurdle as to the proposed residential use.
Got it. Just going to keep going here. I got some more. So we're on the as of right discussion. ADUs as of right that passed 2024. So as long as they do a one bedroom that's 750 square feet one bedroom that's 900 square feet or a two bedroom that's 1,200 square feet, they can build an ADU as of right. Meaning they don't need to seek any relief. They don't need to seek approval from planning or zoning or administrative approval.
There are some other dimensional requirements associated with the ADU, but assuming they are doing that in a dimensionally compliant way, there's no administrative officer review, no planning board review. It's straight to the zoning office, building department for their permits.
So this is an area we are seeing an increase of activity in town. Is that right?
I think we're seeing an increase of activity, not necessarily related to, we'll call it relaxation of legislation. I think you're seeing an increase in activity due to need and also marketplace. Marketplace. You build it and they will come. So
you're saying it's not a result of the relief that's been given based on the law that's changed, it's just the result of the market?
we've had ADUs on the books for years. So I think it's a meeting of a lot of things. It's a change in the marketplace. We've had one builder do it in multiple locations because if you're successful, you're going to repeat that success. But again, I think it's a conversion of a number of issues. I can't point to one. I can't say the change in the legislation caused 20 new ADU units to be built in town. Only the marketplace did it. I think it's a combination of a number of events and scenarios that are leading to the development of ADUs in town.
Now, how do we, monitor that, in the sense that they don't need relief, so it's not like it's, brought to our attention that this is being built, other than if we drive by and see it? Is that just sort of how we, I don't know, I guess, get a sense of whether there's been an increase in activity or not? Like, when I ask you that question, how can you answer that based on what data has been, is available to know that information, other than driving around and seeing it?
We have independent departments, but we don't work in silos. So, Jamie Gorman and I have a phenomenal working relationship. So there are multiple conversations that occur. It comes up at planning board meetings. So it's organic conversation. I'm not aware that we're regularly tracking ADUs for an intended purpose. It's probably something we could do, but again, it's happening organically.
And the ways that the town can and does capture ADUs as opposed to, the principal dwelling unit are twofold. The town, I think, tracks building permits by type, right? Principal structure, accessory structure, and I think there's a special category for accessory dwelling unit, so that at the end of the year, the town can see how many building permits were issued year over year for ADUs previously called accessory apartments. The town also tracks the creation of accessory dwelling units for tax assessment purposes. So a house with an ADU, I think, has a special code, or at least that's taken into account in the value of the home. And I don't know if Jamie Gorman has anything else to add.
Good evening. I just I did put together, over the past 4 years, in 2021, we started with issuing 4 building permits for establishing an ADU. In 2022, we issued 7, 2023, 8, and then in 2024, it's really doubled to 16. And as of today, we've issued 14 for 2025, but I believe we have about 3 more applications pending, so similar to 2024, but we're seeing growth. A lot of people taking advantage of it.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So on the ADUs, it wasn't you, but Rory had said that the square footage, is that accurate? Or, because I'm kind of thinking, like, if you live in a place where you could put an ADU, you can also put a 1,200 square foot tiny home, and doesn't the lot size have some impact on the size of the ADU that you could build there?
So I can handle that. And the law had, I think, less impact on South Kingstown because we did, as Jamie Roberts said, we already allowed accessory apartments, but ADUs are defined differently than accessory apartments were, and the rules are much more liberal. So the law on ADUs says that someone can establish an ADU on their property in one of 3 ways. If it's in an existing building, whether it's the primary building or an existing detached structure like a garage or a barn, and there's no change to the footprint. So in other words, for example, you want to convert your basement to an ADU. That can be done as of right. The second pathway is if you want to establish an ADU, whether it's existing building or new structure, reserved for use and occupancy by a disabled family member. That, if you're building a tiny home for a disabled family member, no zoning board permission is required. And the third pathway is if your lot size if your lot is at least 20,000 square feet. So you have to go down one of those 3 paths to legally establish an ADU. What we've seen over the past year or so with the zoning board is some applicants who need either a new building or a footprint expansion seeking relief from the lot size requirement. So in South Kingstown and in other towns, we've advised that people can establish an ADU if they have less than 20,000 square feet, but they need to get zoning board relief. The same way you would get a dimensional variance, for a setback. So if someone has a 15,000 square foot lot, they need to come to the zoning board. I will tell you, and it has come up in conversation with the zoning board, at least one, maybe a handful of other towns have done away with or lowered that minimum lot size requirement that the state sets as a floor. So, for instance, the town of Barrington recently amended their zoning ordinance reflecting the 2024 changes. They did away with the minimum lot size requirement. So, again, the state says municipality has to allow it as of right where the lot has at least 20,000 square feet. Once these amendments reach your desk, you as the town council can decide whether you want to stay in line with what the state has mandated or if you want to be more permissive. You just can't establish a higher number. You can't say, well, we think it should be a 30,000 square foot lot. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Second question, not exactly related, but related. So when it's brought to my attention that when somebody builds an ADU for their mother, who's 70-something years old, that they are also paying, it's deed restricted, it's not a market venture for anybody, they're not renting it in any way. They're paying the impact fees, which is like $4,000. Although they're getting the deed restriction and the taxes, they basically prepay by the fee. Am I correct in understanding this? And if we're really trying to, and I guess the corollary question is, if we're truly trying to encourage affordable housing, move a senior into this or whatever, then we're not creating it by then causing the impact.
I'll defer to Jamie Gorman. One thing I will say is ADUs for seniors are a temporary living scenario. And at some point, there is potentially a non-senior living there. So you're constructing a unit for temporary occupation by a senior that will potentially be full market rate at some point in time. So again, it's just keep that as a thought. And Jamie primarily handles the permitting of the ADUs and collection of the fees, so I'll defer to him on that.
What's the legal thing when you die, that the hand from the grave, you can't come back, and what's that? It's a legal term. Sorry, I'll come up with it. It's like when you pass away and you're like trying to control things after you die.
I've got clients that do that every day of the week.
I know, but you can't do that. I think, anyway, so, but what you're saying about it, to go back to that is, but that's their mother right now. They could age into that and their children could live in their home. So like, I think you're trying to like be proactively saying like, well, but I'm saying, if we want to create affordable dwelling units, then we charge them an impact fee that's $4,400. It seems to be counterintuitive. Please explain that part.
The only thing I can say is on AD units, and Amy, I think elegantly, showed you the multiple permitting paths associated with ADUs and assisted, structures for caring of a family member. In most scenarios we're seeing on the ADUs, they are at a different price point. They're not necessarily affordable. The marketplace will control what they rent for. In most instances, these ADUs are not deed restricted affordable. So if someone can charge X, that's the market rate for that. They may be more affordable than renting a single family home, but the marketplace controls the price, which someone could make a determination is above the normal 80 to 120% AMI.
If I can jump into this dialogue here, I took what you were saying about the impact fees and the fact that the ADU for a senior is eventually going to be a market rental property, meaning that there is going to be an impact to the town at some point, so why give up the $4,000 ADU? But to Deb's point, the $4,000 impact fee. But to Deb's point, if we tweaked that ordinance for that specific purpose, then we'd be encouraging more ADUs, knowing that down the road, it is going to be a rental because eventually the elderly pass.
And I think to both Deb's point and yours, Mike, those are policy decisions above my pay grade. So if the town as a whole makes a policy decision to defer or not charge the impact fee on an ADU to encourage the development of ADUs, that's a policy decision. For me, that's not a regulatory land use issue.
Right, but it could be a situation where a college, like they then put their college-age person in there or a young professional in there, and you could, as long as there's no lease, right? Like you may not pay lease and you may live in that space, your college, your mother, whatever, then we could defer the fee, and the second it becomes, a market rate, collect the impact fees. Because it seems like this person was very frustrated. They're like, here I am trying to do this good thing, and before I even put a shovel in the ground, I have to spend $4,500 on a fee. I haven't bought a piece of wood.
Understand the intent of what your discussion, very difficult to enforce. How does Mr. Gorman know when someone is, you know,
Well, you have a
it's
rental
not leased to
registry
you,
now.
but there's money, you know,
You have a rental registry.
transferring some other manner.
There certainly would be difficulties with it, and I take your point about the future use mattering. But as a matter of public policy, I think it's something worth the council discussing at some point if we really want to encourage more ADUs. So I think this has been useful just to sort of highlight something that we don't normally deal with.
Absolutely, and again, to me, it's a policy decision. You're potentially talking
called
about
dead hand
$80,000 a year
hand from
of
the grave.
income. Maybe you don't charge it, or it's a deferment.
Right.
It's only due 10 years from construction, and it's almost placed as a mechanics lien. There are potentially mechanisms to either defer or, as a policy decision, just not charge.
Jamie Gorman, I just want you to sort of explain to us how this works. So someone, they want to build an ADU. Now they can do it as of right, but there's an impact fee they have to pay to the town? Is that a fair share development fee? Is that different? Can you talk that through with us? And how is the fee quantified?
So it's based on number of bedrooms, so 2 bedrooms or less is one fee, and then anything above that would be a higher fee. Right now, I think it's around $5,000. So only deed-restricted affordable dwelling units, or ADUs, are exempt from the fair share development fee.
Now, by definition, an ADU is 2 bedrooms or less. So the fee related to building an ADU is capped. And that amount is what?
I don't have the exact amount. It is around $4,000. It changes every fiscal year. It's somewhere around 4,400.
And that's just on all new development, period.
Any new dwelling unit.
But we do have the authority as the council to, I guess, not charge that fee to ADUs, but still charge it to all other development?
Well, I would say absolutely, but you've also, if you remember, you did provide the exemption for all ADUs, and that every permit we've issued, somebody, the owners have, opted into that.
Well, they automatically get 5 years, but they could do it for 30 if they didn't,
So nobody's opted in for the 30-year deed restriction, unfortunately.
Well, maybe if they did, we could make it where they wouldn't have to pay the impact fee.
But they're basically, you're paying the impact fee and you're getting the 5-year tax waiver. You know what I'm saying? You're basically prepaying some of the tax that you've forgoed it's really
But the
not.
5-year abatement related to ADUs, that's not all ADUs. You got to apply and be approved for that. Am I correct on
You
that?
just said everyone's
You do
trying.
have to apply,
Everyone's
but
going for it.
essentially, we're certifying that they meet the requirements for an
So now
ADU.
that it's as of right, anyone who builds it will get the 5-year abatement.
No, they're
Nobody's going to
applying.
turn that down, I don't think.
Okay.
Jamie, on page 11, or slide 11, it says the town could benefit from additional state funding and other resources, including outreach to higher education institutions, including the University of Rhode Island. So URI put out a press release charting a bold new vision, very fun. includes new buildings, and the plan calls for 31 academic or residential housing for new or renew, right, housing. And in the press release, all the way down the bottom, it says, let's see, we will partner with the town of South Kingstown and the Department of Transportation, depending on which project it is, to make it a better transition on how you get to campus. When is the last time we have sat down comprehensively with the University of Rhode Island to talk about their housing goals, our housing goals, the effects of comprehensive campus plans? When is the last time that we have sat down formally and done that?
I'll answer the first part of that, and then I'll defer to Mr. Manny on any higher level meetings. Our department has had conversations with the development department at URI on a project basis. We are also aware of their master plan for the expansion of the campus, including adding additional residential projects. They have 3 primary projects in the queue right now, which is a redo of Grad Circle on the south side of Route 138, and then 2 additional dorms in a private-public partnership on Flag Road. And again, there are other projects identified in their master plan. We've spoken to them about that, but a high-level meeting, I'll defer to Mr. Manny on those discussions.
Not specifically for student housing. It's mostly for like a hotel they want to put up and other buildings, but they're not addressing the student housing issue at all with us.
Seems to me that if they're going to partner with a Boston-based, private company to do a large 10-year plan that it will affect the town forever, that it would be best if our town staff was involved in that, or at least had the conversation. So I guess my point is that I agree with your slide. Outreach to higher education institutions should be a part of what you do in the next quarter. I think that making sure this council has been very clear about how we're trying to do affordable housing, how we're trying to make sure that the state changes don't affect the neighborhoods. And one of the big effects of the neighborhoods is student housing. And so if we're not being proactive in reaching out to the University of Rhode Island to put our ducks in a row, then I think we're missing out big time. And it's all window dressing. We'll reach out to them. No, we need to sit down with them. Not us, you and the staff. I think that would be important.
Yeah, and if you're referring to the master plan prepared by Sasaki Associates, we were not actively involved in the development of that plan.
I think sometimes the University of Rhode Island forgets about us, and I think that we need to be proactive in reaching out to them. When we see things like this, say, hey, we would like to have a part in it.
I can assure you, I reach out to them.
I know you do.
And I'm pretty sure Jim is very involved with the president's office. I think you are in touch with President Parlange. I know he came here when he first arrived several years ago. Correct, Jim? You've been there often.
It is, and that sounds good, but they don't have any plans. Like you meet with them and they're, how are you addressing the student housing issue? Well, it's just happening the way it happens. Our line is always open.
So, going back to Oak Street, so one of my concerns is unintended consequences, like we saw on Oak Street with the lack of a second, the lack of 2 ingresses and egresses on each unit. And it seems like that had something to do with the change from the 3 to the 5 person. And I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but it really disturbs me that those very large student housing, or presumably student housing, only has the front door, and that if there was a fire, the people on the second floor, the only way to get out would be from an 18-foot window. So I just, I just want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and I don't know, can we put together some sort of a request for our legislative leaders to change this as soon as possible in the next session? Because we can't have buildings all over that
What?
don't have.
But wasn't that fire code, I don't mean to interrupt, but wasn't it like saying that you'd have to change Rhode Island fire code? Was
It is, it's
That's what we were told at the meeting.
right. It seems like there's no fire standards for duplexes. Like, there's no, it seems, from my understanding is that there's nothing in it, in the fire code that says that just doesn't seem right. And
So just, you have the ability yourself to present a resolution that we can take up at a meeting, and we can try to advocate ahead of the legislative season happening.
that's what I wanted, that's what I definitely want to do.
So then-
So how do we do that?
You just request to put on the next town
All right.
council meeting that we draft an ordinance, draft resolution, sorry.
All right. I can't do that right now, though.
Well,
It's
the
gotta be
agenda's
at
already set for Monday.
All right.
It's fine, 2 weeks, we got it.
I got a few more. All right, Jamie, I want to dive into inclusionary zoning. I know there was some changes in 2024 and some further changes in 2025. And just to be clear on what we're talking about here, I know we have some local regulations that if you build, a certain development, a certain number of units, percentage would have to be affordable. Is that what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusionary zoning?
Yes, I'll try and give you a relative example with some numbers. So if we just use a 20-lot subdivision. 20-lot subdivision, because of its size, would trigger inclusionary zoning because it's more than 6. Under our regulations, the 20 proposed units, and this is what the developer does, he comes in with 20. That will establish the 25% criteria. So they will be required to do 5 units affordable out of the 20.
And just to pause you quick,
Yep.
because we haven't met the 10% threshold, they can bypass any inclusionary zoning.
No, they can't bypass. So let me get.
Okay, go ahead.
So under the inclusionary, 20 lots, 25% affordable, required to have 5 units affordable, deed restricted, 99 years. Then they get a density bonus on top of their 20 lots because they're providing affordable units. The density bonus kicks them up maybe 4 more lots. So they go to 24 lots. And because they get the density bonus, they're allowed to relax some of their dimensional requirements. So where they showed 20 lots, we'll say on a cul-de-sac, they can use that same footprint and now put 24 lots on the same area of land. Then they're 24 lots, now only required to still do 5. And that's where your percentage goes from 25 down to 16 or 17, because now it's 5 of 24. Again, I'm using generic numbers, they're not exact, but they're used for example purposes. The reverse of that is that because we don't meet the 10% threshold on the affordability side, that same developer could choose to do a comprehensive permit, would not have to adhere to any zoning regulations. In essence, they could seek relief from any provision: front yard, side yard setback, height, location, size of property. Their trade-off is 25% of all of their units would have to be affordable, but only for 30 years. They save 69 years on their deed restriction, and they don't have to comply with zoning. So, I want to say if I'm a developer, I choose the comprehensive permit process. I only have to maybe do 6 units, 1 more unit than the 5. It benefits the town but I don't have to be code compliant. Under inclusionary zoning, you primarily have to be code compliant, except when you get your density units. So the original 20 lots have to be arranged in a completely code compliant manner. So we'll say 20 lots, 1 acre zone, you're gonna need 20 acres, just simple math.
So
If
Jamie,
I can't permit that, I could do it on 10 acres, because I don't need to be code compliant.
do you get the density bonuses if you go through comprehensive permit?
No.
Okay.
I'm just going to jump in here, because I got to correct some things.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Planning view versus legal view.
yes, you do get density bonuses when you go through the comprehensive permit process, and I'm going to go through that and then go back to inclusionary zoning. Comprehensive permits didn't used to have density bonuses that were established in state law. A developer could propose kind of whatever they wanted for density. Really, the only limit on density was just what the site could allow in terms of wetlands and utilities. Now, the LMI Housing Act, which governs comprehensive permits, has minimum density bonuses that escalate depending on the percentage of affordable housing included within the development. So for a development that includes the 25% LMI, that's standard, the density bonus will be one number. If you bump that LMI percentage up to 50%, you get a higher density bonus, and the rare project from the nonprofit housing developer that's all affordable gets the highest level of density bonus. Density bonuses also depend on whether the site has public utilities available. So projects that are served by public sewer and water are eligible for the highest category. So those are minimum density bonuses set forth in the law now for comprehensive permits. Inclusionary zoning, and the percentage is now 15%, not 25%. That was changed in 2023 and rolled back in 2024. That is still an optional tool for municipalities. South Kingstown has had inclusionary zoning on the books for many years prior to all these recent changes as a tool to incrementally and slowly bump up our percentage of affordable housing. But yeah, for every inclusionary development, you're also getting more market rate units, so it doesn't move the needle too much over time. No, yes, I'm sorry, in the inclusionary zoning law, there are density bonuses, 1 for 1. And I'm going to go back to the numbers that I used in my memo, because I don't want to do math on the fly either, but now, if a developer proposes a 6-unit development, 15% of 6.9 has to be rounded up to 1, so that they come in and we say, okay, you have to give us 1 affordable unit, but for that affordable unit, we'll give you an extra market rate unit. So now the 6-unit development becomes 7 units, because out of those originally proposed 6, 1 is LMI, and then you get an extra market rate. The 2023 law on inclusionary zoning had a 2-for-1 density bonus, and there was a lot of pushback on that because it tended to balloon developments in a way that wasn't, I think, acceptable to maybe either the developer or municipalities. Does that answer the question?
It does answer the question. That's helpful. So just thinking this through, sounds like there's potential to create more market rate units going through the inclusionary zoning route as compared to comprehensive permit. But if you go through inclusionary zoning, you have to comply with all the local regs. You avoid having to comply with the local regs by going through a comprehensive permit, but the amount of units you can add through the density bonuses is based on the amount of affordable that you include in this development?
So comprehensive, whether a developer will choose to go the inclusionary route or the comprehensive permit route, I think in many cases, a substantial development with a lot of units will go the comprehensive permit route. But if I'm a developer who wants to do half a dozen lots, that's eligible for administrative approval now, right? That would be considered a minor land development project or a minor subdivision. The advantage of having inclusionary zoning on the books for the town, continuing to retain inclusionary zoning is, as Jamie indicated, once we do hit that 10% threshold, having inclusionary zoning on the books, that closes the door to future comprehensive permit applications, which I think the typical, a common reaction from residents to a comprehensive permit is, this doesn't fit into the neighborhood. And it oftentimes, not only this planning board, but planning boards everywhere in Rhode Island say, we want to promote affordable housing, but this proposal isn't right for this site. So the town has much less control over comprehensive permit applications because our regs are really set aside. The law forces the town to look at the development through the lens of affordable housing.
Just
Thank you, Amy.
one thing to add to that, in what I was trying to do in my example on the comp permit versus inclusionary zoning. When you do inclusionary zoning, your baseline density has to be compliant with the existing zoning regulations. So if you're in a 1 acre zone and you have 10 acres, in essence, you're starting with 10 lots. Then you do your affordable, then you get your density bonus. If I'm a comprehensive permit, minimum acreage is irrelevant. On that 10 acres, I could propose 50 units as my baseline because I don't need to be code compliant with any dimensional standard. So, and that's why when I was going through my presentation, I said the changes between inclusionary and comprehensive as it relates to density bonuses and movement, I think is a discussion that's going to continue as the development community finds their way of which is the most appropriate permitting path. But if I have 10 acres, inclusionary gives me 10 lots plus a density bonus. If I have 10 acres and I'm on sewer and water and I comp permit you, my density is whatever I determine I want my density to be. So it's not netted at 10. It could start at 30 or 40. It could start in a 4-story building at 10 units per floor for 40. And then to Amy's point, I will get a density bonus on top of that. So again, it's a discussion that we will react to as applications come in. But it's hard to compare apples to apples.
Good.
And so that, when you talk about, it's a very powerful tool, right, to change the way the town looks in a way that I see many residents coming and saying, we don't like this. We saw it on the mini version with Oak Street. So my question is, what can we do to sort of put some better guardrails? Because someone's going to come up with, oh, I have a 1 acre here, and I want to put 6 units, and I must do whatever. I don't know. Maybe they can't because of the height restrictions, but maybe they can because it's, when you do a comp permit, all of those things go out the window.
That's your point, and
So how do we
Councilwoman
help the
Alley
community?
touched
'Cause-
upon about unintended consequences.
Yeah.
The comprehensive plan runs amok of trying to plan in a systematic manner within your community because it allows the developer to deviate from the planning that you've undertaken to determine what the density you want in a particular area. So you're right, the comp permit as a net can result in unintended consequences because you can't plan for them and you can't create regulations to limit them because they can ask for relief from them.
So what do we do? Go back to the legislators and say, this is really bad, this is too powerful, this doesn't give local control, this is going to create a community that our residents don't want, right?
I don't think there's a community nationwide that has determined the correct way to do this or to regulate this. You have two competing entities, a town who wants to manage growth in an orderly, systematic manner. And then you have the affordable housing components who are trying to create affordable housing, who view that systematic, methodic approach as potentially deviant to the goal of providing affordable housing in a community. So again, they're conflicting policies.
Mm-hmm.
And as a planning director and a planner, if I had an answer, I'd probably be working either for the affordable side or the development side. There is no one size fits all.
Last tiny question. What is the law that was passed so that we can do something about, like, which general law is that? Is it listed here?
That was the LMI Housing Act, which is 30-plus years old. And
Was
it
it
has-
amended?
Yeah, I think the significant amendments were in '23 and '24, but there were also significant amendments this year, some of which don't even take effect until January. But that's the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to clarify why I asked that question before. I feel like a comment after was that, that your door is always open for URI. The reason I asked that question, I know you have a good relationship with President Parlange. I know that you reach out, and Jamie reaches out as well. I look at press releases that we get sometimes from them, one from December that said, we're opening 1,100 new beds at URI. That's going to have just as much of an effect as the state laws that we have here, right, that we're going through tonight. So just want to point out and how important it is to really try our best to be proactive in that relationship. That's all. Our largest employer, one of our largest issues is the maintenance of that relationship, and we have the top university in New England, right? So I just want to be proactive in saying they do have a plan now, came out a month ago. Let's go through that. Let's see what similarities they have to try and develop Kingston with our plans as well. How can we match that, right? What is different that we need to kind of talk to them about, whether it comes to water, environmental, housing, all of that. Because I think it's just important to be proactive with them. And that's why I just wanted to clarify that. And thank you for the presentation tonight.
I've got a couple of specifics that I just want to make sure that we've covered before the end of the night. I'm going to take one more quick shot at Oak Street. Early on in your presentation, you talked about the municipality having regulations in place, and the example you gave was with respect to a drive-through, where the developer would have to comply. Is it possible for us to enact something, and Patty's main concern, and it's legitimate, is two-story or higher buildings not having multiple ingress and egress? Is there any, does this legislation allow for it, prohibit us from enacting something? And it strikes.
Yeah, and I'll give my opinion. I think Jamie Gorman may have an opinion as well.
Okay.
Where we would attempt to regulate something that's already specifically regulated by either the building code or fire code, like ingress and egress and I'm no expert on either of those codes, but that subject is specifically regulated by the state. And the state has also set limits on how towns can define something like building height, for instance. I don't think ingress and egress is an area that we can regulate, only because it's regulated by the state at the code compliance level. I think there are options for us to regulate, whether it's duplex, high buildings, but ingress and egress. And Jamie, do you have an opinion on that as the building official?
I believe it would take an amendment to the state building code, so legislation, and I believe Massachusetts has done that to require 1- and 2-family dwellings to have no less than 2 egress doors. But again, I don't believe a local ordinance could preempt or supersede the state law.
I want to stick with this just a little bit. I get the concept of state law preempting us. That's fine. But if the building code doesn't address it, that's not the same as us exceeding it. That's probably not the right way to say it, but you get the concept, Amy?
No, but I think it is addressed, because I think our separate ingress and egress is required for like multi-unit apartment buildings.
It does vary. So I mean, a 1- and 2-family dwelling only requires 1 egress door. And certainly most homes have a side door or a back door. But I think if maybe the code were to say Yeah, I mean, certainly I could get a, interpretation or verify with the state if there is a way.
I'd be curious because, and I didn't check into the building code. I did talk to somebody in the fire marshal's office who said, our fire code doesn't address duplexes.
That's correct. The fire code is, if it was a 3-family or a 4-family or a commercial property, they would have a whole thick book
Right.
to regulate, but 1 and 2 family, it's just smoke and CO detectors.
All right. The second specific example I just wanted to hit before the end of the night is, sometime in the next several months, we're going to be taking up this multi-use zoning for the Dale Carlia corridors. Is there anything in these legislative changes that limit what we can and can't do, or better still, what the current owners can and can't do until we've passed this? My understanding is those are commercial zones. They cannot, right now, have housing in them without
So
coming to the zoning or planning
yeah,
boards.
one of the legislative changes was that adaptive reuse.
I was
So
gonna ask about that.
again, within the footprint. So
Okay.
if you have a 1-floor, 10,000 square foot building under adaptive reuse, you may be positioned to do residential on your first floor. It would not allow you to add a 2nd-floor residential or a 3rd-floor residential.
Right.
Would not allow you to keep commercial on your first floor and add residential 2nd or 3rd floor. So they're
none of
two
the-
different animals.
As I understand Amy's answer, none of the current active buildings would be eligible for that anyway, because they has to be vacant for a year?
No, that's industrial mills.
Oh, it's not commercial, it's just industrial.
Sorry, I was
That's okay.
unclear on that.
No,
Yeah,
no,
that applies
that's-
only to industrial buildings.
That's why I wanted to ask the question tonight, because I want to have a context before we take up the multi-use zoning to understand what landowners can and can't do now and what these changes may or may not allow them to do, depending on what we enact.
And just quick thought on that.
I'm
Just
going
move
back
it
to
right over.
Patty's thing, but okay.
There's an affordable housing requirement related to adaptive use. I thought I heard you mention that earlier. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could you just, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, so it's not a requirement per se, it's just the municipality is limited from controlling density where the project does include affordable housing. We came across this issue in another municipality recently, and it was an example of where the state's changes in trying to respond to planners' concern had made things more confusing, because there's nothing specific. It does say, in adaptive reuse projects where not less than 10% of LMI housing is provided, the local zoning ordinance shall not specify any maximum density. So it's not that affordable housing is always required, it's just that if it is provided, we're limited from controlling density.
Got it.
And again, I mentioned earlier that a lot of the legislation's new, and until it's interpreted and utilized, and potentially you could put four,
I
Michael
understand.
appreciate it, if you put 4 attorneys in the room, they could read that sentence and 4 planners, and we could have 8 different interpretations of that rule. And again, we're learning as we're applying.
Okay. So it's dead hand control. That's what that hand from the grave thing is. You're all nodding now. It's dead hand control, hand from the grave.
It's not absolutely barred, but if you go way overboard,
Right.
then the court will bar.
I didn't go to law school, but I almost went. So, but I want to go back to Patty's thing about, because I do feel very empathetic to Patty's position. There's 20 college students, whatever. It's essentially a mini dorm, right? Is there a way to creatively either, one, if a landlord is providing individual leases within that, is it, right? If you rent bedroom A and B to Susan and C to Maria, like, if there's 5 leases, is it a different way to, like, could we zone it differently? Is there any sort of, anything that we could do to sort of protect?
Because I grew up and I think about Providence College fire, so a blow dryer killed 10 people, I think, so.
I have a good answer to that, yes and no. One
Okay.
thing we really didn't dive in tonight is the co-living changes to legislation.
You have one line on it.
I know.
That's it.
That would take 2 hours
Okay.
just to talk about that tonight. Amy and I are working on, at your request, some potential revisions to the duplex standards and looking at how they're rented, how they're configured, what the bedroom sizes are, the number of bedrooms, the footprints of the buildings, the overall sizes of the buildings to make them more traditionally residential in scale. The difficulty becomes regulating who ultimately occupies the bedrooms within the building. It's tough to regulate during the permitting process because you will just have a developer saying it's a 2-bedroom duplex.
Right.
We issue all the permits. Jamie Gorman, 2 years later, goes there and knocks on the door and says, tenants are instructed not to say anything, other than staking out who's coming and going. Some of those things are extremely difficult to regulate. So Amy and I are talking about our best efforts moving forward of how to address unintended consequences as it relates to duplexes. It's not so duplexes because you allow triplexes, fourplexes, and other things. So if you're allowing a fourplex, there's nothing to prevent someone from doing a fourplex with 5 bedrooms in each fourplex, and now you have a bigger multifamily home with a different transient type population if they're not the traditional household family. So again, there's no one size fits all. There's no one solution to the problem. And in some instances, we're going to write a regulation. Someone's going to get savvier than we are, interpret that differently, do something that we didn't anticipate that we'll only have to react to again. And in some instances, unfortunately, we have to be reactive, even though we're trying to be as proactive as we can, anticipating development in the future. But, Amy and I have been working on that. So.
Just quick follow-up on that. So potentially, the ability to limit the number of unrelated persons in a duplex?
So I and Jamie's indicated we've had some conversations. One approach that I've raised as something the town might consider here is what Providence adopted several years ago. Providence limits the number of not unrelated people, but the number of college students who can live together in certain zones. So in Providence, they have in their zoning ordinance no more than 3 college students can live in single-family dwellings within, the R and R1 and R1A districts. That was challenged and upheld by the Rhode Island Supreme Court in 2020. There's not the same vagueness concern that the Superior Court found last year with respect to the word unrelated, who's a family member, who's not, where does adoption come in? A college student is an easy definition. That's a potential tool for South Kingstown to consider, either in connection with duplexes or frankly in connection with, you could use it as a tool town-wide or just target it in specific districts like Providence has. But with respect to the unrelated persons enforcement issue, and I know our office did I think, confidential memo to the council on that, that is still on hold because the General Assembly hasn't amended the definition of what constitutes a household. That decision involved Narragansett's ordinance, but all Narragansett did in terms of defining a family was copy exactly what the state law defines it as, what's a household, what's unrelated. So either the General Assembly needs to define it in a way that will satisfy vagueness concerns, or I don't know if that decision has been appealed. I don't have information on that. But still, the unrelated persons is a route that we can't go down right now while that decision remains in place.
Thank you.
Well, I want to go back. So that is a good nugget about the zoning change or the college students thing, because I've had many conversations. If you lived here a long time ago, Eastward Look was affordable housing for people, like regular people live there, and now it's all investment property. And where will URI students come to? I don't know. They live in Snug Harbor, they live in Matunic, they live in Wakefield, they live off Broad Rock Road. So we need to think about that, because it would be very, very sad if, I don't think this could happen, but someone said, what if Teft Hill went that way? That would be very, very sad, right? So we don't want to do that, because that's the closest one, potentially. But we need to think about that zoning, college, what did you say? College students in particular zones?
Yeah, limiting how many college students can live together in particular zoning districts.
Do we
But
want-
did I also understand you to say that it could be town-wide?
Yeah.
It certainly could be town-wide.
So what do we do? Do we want them to present something in a couple weeks? I mean,
Well, I think they're still fleshing it out.
right, but
That has to go to the planning board for an advisory opinion. I think we're close to getting something for the planning board's review. We're still working on some details.
related to the college students in the zones like Providence?
Correct. So I think I understood the task from the council as, give us some options for preventing this situation in the future. And I know one of the concerns was just the size of the building, but I think another concern was related to the 5, college students, presumably, who are going to be living in each of these units. And so I think one option for the council is to adopt regulations aimed at both the big duplex and the college students cohabitating.
I also think on that note, when we are drafting that, we should keep the University of Rhode Island in the loop about this. I mean, if we don't have to change the ordinance because they hear we're going to be changing the ordinance and they make an internal rule for students that they can't live in X amount of places, that might be helpful to us. I mean, I don't think that they're going to be super pumped that we're going to be having an ordinance change about how they can live. I think that we need to keep them in the loop about how we go forward with this. We need to keep this relationship strong. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay. I mean, we've had some great discussion. It's about 9 p.m. So I think we should, at this point, open it up. We got some planning board members who wish to speak, also other members of the public. So anyone who's been watching, who's in the audience, who's interested, everybody to come on up. We just ask that you introduce yourself.
Good evening, council members. Maria Mack, Planning Board Chair. Thank you for having this initial meeting. As you can see from Jamie's 100,000-foot view this evening, it's very complicated. There are some things that we actually did not discuss tonight because there's a lot. Dimensional requirements for substandard lots, modifications, whereby similar to Oak Street and some other adjacent areas, you could have building heights that considerably exceed the 35-foot height restriction. You could have lot lines that are, you could have built to the lot lines that are a foot away from the lot lines. Things like this. And the actual timeline for a lot of these changes, even though we've been discussing 3 years, basically started in 2016, 2017, with changes to wetlands regs, then time periods for approvals, then building height, then quorums, then some of the low mod changes, the first iteration of ADUs, and then the density bonuses, some of which we've discussed. So it goes on, and it's like treading water, really. It takes so much time and effort for the staff, in addition to all of their work that they need to do with review of projects, special projects, things like hazard mitigation plan, and so on. So I think it's important to be cognizant of that, and we're down a staff member as well, as you probably know. I think the majority of the planning board feels that if we could have another time for a work session to discuss some of the details, It's been great that we've talked about inclusionary zoning, which initially we had such high hopes for, and now, as you can see, it's 15% affordable units. That detracts from the original purpose. And Jamie's example of 20 units and then the calculation from that, if that were a comp permit, it could be 40 or 50 or 60 units, and we have so little control. Having a big picture look, which is what planners do, thinking about things like infrastructure, water, sewer capacity, all those things are related. All those things are on a comprehensive plan. We need to be thinking big picture as we move forward so that we can manage some of these things that come forward and have better planning overall. But I really hope that we can have a work session with the planning board at some point in time and discuss more of the details, because those are things that you're going to be hearing from the public, particularly when that first project shows up, whereby there's no notice to abutters and it's all done administratively and no planning board input as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. All right, anyone else in the audience wish to speak? I invite you to just come on up.
Josh Port, I had some questions about the college student limits in given buildings. My worry is that if you try to do something like this, so you have a set amount of people who are at the university roughly. I've heard from multiple different people at URI over the past couple of years that they're not intending to increase enrollment for a few different reasons. So if you just assume that's fixed, and you say they're going to be living in 3 sets of places, students. It's going to be either on campus, they're going to be commuting from somewhere else, like presumably their home elsewhere in the state, or they're going to be living somewhere in the communities around here. And so obviously we want to encourage the university to build more housing, and they're trying to do that. Obviously we want faster and more, that's great, but my worry is if we try to say, well, maybe this was a dwelling that could have had 5 students in it, now we're only going to allow some cap of maybe 3 students in it, then all that's going to do is push other people who would have potentially been living in that unit elsewhere into the community and just increase stress on the existing supply. So any other zones where people are able to live and that regulation wouldn't apply, there'd be even more pressure from students to take up, sort of fill that container. So I guess I'm curious, it's a tough issue, and I know people have a lot of concerns about noise and whatever else, but I am worried about unintended consequences, and I know that the supply of housing is very fragile and very precious. So I wanted to make that point.
Thank you. All right, anyone else in the audience wish to come on up? All right, well, it's been a good discussion. Any thoughts from council members?
So just to get a read on, how do you feel about a future work session with the planning board?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. When do you think, because they can work, we don't have, it's not a votable item, the staff can work on something, so what do you think? Do you want to do?
Perhaps within 2 months?
December?
Can December work? I mean, December is a light month for meetings. We could probably squeeze that in, assuming
We have
availability.
the CIP, right, in December?
Well,
Yeah,
it's not.
Actually, December will probably be pretty busy because we have several CIP meetings and I would imagine another homestead exemption meeting, but we'll add it you tell us when you want it and we'll get it done.
Well, we're not going to pick a date right now.
No, how about we just say, work it out based on wherever they think?
Yeah,
but
let's see what kind of dates we can get proposed within the next 2
Maybe.
months.
What do you want to say, Rich?
2 to 3 months, if within 2 months is too quick. Is there enough seats for all that? I'm not sure.
Well,
Oh, you'll certainly be invited to the meeting.
we,
Why don't you come up and talk in the mic?
Come on up.
I just think it's important that when we consider what we're going to do as a town for housing, that the Affordable Housing Committee be part of those discussions to help with advisory, but to also help with what work we maybe need to be focusing on that we're not. Because I think there's a lot of opportunity for density that we're not necessarily considering in some places. Wakefield Elementary is a big topic of controversy, I'll call it, right? But it's also a prime location in the town for density and opportunity. The population in this state is now 65 and older. Numbers are higher than 18 and younger. So you've got multiple types of needs for multiple types of housings in multiple areas. And all I'm suggesting, and different levels of income. So all I'm suggesting is, as we're talking about ordinances and process and all of that, that there's an opportunity to include different boards in those discussions so that there's multiple opinions to offer in whatever a final decision is made. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any problem with it. I mean, I think Rich has a depth of knowledge just because of his own work with Habitat, so.
I would like
makes
the
sense.
Affordable Housing Committee to be there.
There
All
you go.
right. So let's try to see what we can do within the next 3 months and go from there. Okay. All right.
Thank you for all your hard
coming.
work.
It's been a great discussion.
Motion to
Excellent
adjourn.
job, Amy Goins, Jamie Rabbit, Jamie Gorman. We got a motion to adjourn. We got a second. Any discussion? You sure? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. This meeting is over. See you.